I don't remember the music they played at my father's funeral. They say it was a string quartet, classical, dignified, but all I heard was the sound of paper crumpling in my coat pocket, the letter he left me. The last thing he ever wrote to Jenna, my daughter. If you're reading this, I'm gone. But remember, ValeTech is my blood, and you're the only part of it. I never regretted. I didn't cry, I couldn't. Because as I stood at the back of the service, surrounded by perfectly folded handkerchiefs and crocodile tears, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. I didn't belong there. Not because I wasn't family, but because someone had already rewritten what family meant. And then she arrived, Heather Lane. She walked in late intentionally. I'm sure she wore black silk and red lipstick with a diamond ring on her finger that shimmered with every step she took down the aisle. Beside her arm in arm was Elliot Vale, my father's son with his second wife, my half-brother, her fiancé. I didn't flinch, didn't gasp, but inside something calcified. Heather used to be my father's assistant, a nobody, a clever smile and soft voice with a resume padded in half-truths and charm. Now she was wearing his ring and standing in the seat I was born into. The will was read a week later. Jonathan Fielding, the family's lawyer, and the only man who ever said I, reminded him of my father. More than anyone sat behind a desk that smelled of wood polish and broken promises. We were in the same law firm where I used to sit cross-legged under the conference table as a child playing with embossed stamps while my father signed contracts worth millions. Now I sat at the opposite end, an outsider. Jonathan cleared his throat. The official last will and testament of Walter Vale. I held my breath. I didn't need much. I didn't care about the estate or the headlines. I just wanted confirmation that he saw me, that I mattered. But then he said it leaves controlling interest of ValeTech Corporation to Heather Lane. Vale. My name was never mentioned. The air left my lungs, not with a bang, but like the slow hiss of a tire going flat. Heather's face was the picture of serenity. He said I was the only one who truly understood his vision, she offered, smiling at me with practiced pity. I'm so sorry, Jenna. Sorry. I stared at her and said nothing, because I knew what this was. Not a mistake, not oversight, a hijacking. Later that night, I sat alone in my Brooklyn apartment. No doorman, no marble floors, just peeling paint, and a cracked coffee table. I poured cheap wine into an old glass and stared at the ceiling. Heather had outplayed me. No, she had preyed on me. While I was keeping my distance to avoid scandal, she was playing the long game. She became indispensable. She attached herself to Elliot like a barnacle to a sinking ship. And somewhere along the way, she convinced my father that she was more legacy than I was. She didn't just steal a company. She stole my name without ever touching the ink. I reread his letter, folded, refolded. Every word was a vein in my chest. He had meant for me to take ValeTech, but she had made sure his intentions were never formalized, no updated will. Just this letter, just the truth trapped in handwriting that could be challenged in court. You don't fight lies with tears, I whispered. You drown them in evidence. The next morning, I called Oliver Crane, a retired legal strategist and my father's former fixer, the kind of man who knew where the bodies were buried, and more importantly, who buried them. He answered on the second ring. Jenna, I'm not calling for sympathy. I said I'm calling for a strategy. Silence, then a chuckle. Good? Because sympathy is for people who lose. You're not done yet. Are you? I'm just getting started. We met at a dingy cafe on 45th Street, no press, no noise, just two people with too much history and too much at stake. Oliver brought documents, he brought truth, and he brought a name, Crane Reserve Ventures. We'll buy from underneath her, he said. Stake by stake, vote by vote. I don't want headlines, I warned. Then we'll give you shadows. Perfect. Over the next 6 months, I became a ghost. While Heather played queen in photo ops and fundraisers, I traced every loose thread in the ValeTech shareholder registry. I bought shares through shell firms, funneled through Crane Reserve. Every handshake was silent, every document encrypted, every ally sworn to secrecy. I didn't need to scream, I needed to own. One night, while scrolling through a ValeTech investor livestream, I saw her speak again. She called herself a modern-day tech visionary. She called ValeTech her life's mission. She didn't mention my father's name once. And for the first time I smiled, because if she had to erase him to validate herself, she'd never last. In silence, I sharpened my blade. In silence, I built my wall. And in silence, I made one vow. She lied to take my place in the will, so I'll take the very company she married into. She took my place in the will, so I chose a different position right behind her. People assume silence means surrender, but silence, real silence, is a war drum you can only hear if you're the one about to lose. Heather never heard it. She was too busy celebrating. The headlines kept coming. Heather Lane Vale, the new face of tech elegance from assistant to empire architect. A female titan rising from the legacy of Walter Vale. I read them all, from my two-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, hardwood floors that squeaked, paint that peeled, and a broken oven that never quite closed. It didn't matter, because I wasn't building my comeback with luxury, I was building it with leverage. Oliver and I met every Thursday, always in different locations, always short, silent, surgical. He brought spreadsheets, I brought targets. Heather's too public, I said. That's her weakness, and you're too private, he replied. That's your advantage. We were perfect opposites. She built castles on magazine covers. I tunneled under the ground she never bothered to look at. Through Crane Reserve Ventures, a shell company named after Oliver Wise began purchasing ValeTech shares, tiny ones, at first forgotten ones, a disgruntled retiree here, a minor investor there, former employees who'd cashed out years ago and barely remembered they owned anything. I paid well, I paid quietly. No noise, no fanfare, just power, changing hands. By the end of the second month, I held 6.4% of ValeTech through intermediaries, not enough to raise alarms, but enough to cause tremors. Heather, meanwhile, was on the cover of Forbes Women, wearing my father's last name like it was earned, calling herself self-made in a company built on my bloodline. Then came Project Lumos, her big idea. Her first real initiative as visionary, an expansion into AI-powered logistics in Southeast Asia. The pitch groundbreaking, the plan laughable. The core algorithm was unstable, the regional infrastructure wasn't ready, but Heather didn't care. She wanted headlines, not results, so she pushed it live. Within 30 days, the system crashed, shipping delays, lawsuits, lost contracts, stock dropped 11%, and she blamed internal legacy code. Translation: my father's team. It was my cue. I reached out to Harlan Strauss, a former board member Heather had forced out under the guise of progress. We met for coffee. He didn't even let me finish my pitch. You've got Walter's eyes, he said. But sharper, he handed over his 5% stake to a holding firm registered under Crane Reserve. Don't let her burn what he built. 2 months later, we passed 21%. Heather had no idea, because her world was noise, gala dinners, fashion, launches, speaking tours about disrupting male-dominated boardrooms. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding the boardroom behind her back, brick by brick, share by share. Elliot called me one night. His voice was low. Hesitant, Jenna. What are you doing? Taking back what's mine? Heather's not as invincible as she thinks. Good, that'll make the fall quieter. You could still sue, challenge the will. There's enough to raise questions. I don't want questions, Elliot. I want control. He didn't argue. He never could. Because deep down, Elliot always knew the truth. I wasn't the problem. I was the plan. They were too scared to follow. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for, the Q3 report, a disaster. Lumos was bleeding cash. Executive bonuses were still being approved. And Heather off in Milan giving a TED talk about emotional capitalism. I filed the motion that same night. Request for emergency shareholder assembly. Subject: reevaluation of executive leadership. We had 37% voting power locked. All I needed was momentum. That's when the whispers started. Heather's PR team scrambled. Internal memos leaked, news outlets speculated, was ValeTech's queen about to be unseated? Was there a coup? And the best part? They had no idea whose hands were pulling the strings. Heather rushed back from Europe, called emergency meetings, threatened to sue, but the bylaws were clear. A shareholder vote of confidence could be triggered at 35%, and she didn't have the numbers to block it. Not anymore. She showed up at Crane Reserve's Midtown office unannounced, demanded to know who was behind the motion. Our receptionist, trained to perfection, told her the managing partner was unavailable. She left, fuming. I watched the security footage later. She paced the lobby like a caged animal dressed in a $2,000 suit that couldn't hide the panic. For the first time, I saw it. She wasn't untouchable. She was just unprepared. Oliver and I met one last time before the vote. No cafe, no bar. This time, it was in the ValeTech archives, deep in the basement of the building I once called home. We didn't speak much. He just handed me the final file. You've passed, 43.7%. Then it's time. Are you ready? I looked up at the ceiling, remembering the man who built this company on grit and risk. He trusted the wrong people. I said I won't. I walked through the empty halls of ValeTech the night before the vote. No badge, no escort, just memory. Ran my hand along the glass wall outside the boardroom, the same wall I once stood behind as a teenager, watching my father command attention without ever raising his voice. That's when I realized I didn't want to take Heather's place. I wanted to take her illusion and destroy it. She lied to take my place in the will, so I stepped behind her and waited. Now she's out of steps, and I'm out of mercy. Power doesn't always come with a title. Sometimes it arrives as an email no one understands, or a name on a quarterly report nobody reads. That's the kind of power I wanted. Heather wanted to be seen. I wanted control. And control doesn't need a spotlight. It only needs a signature. 38 days before the shareholder meeting, I sat in my office, sipping black coffee and watching a live stream of Heather's speech at the Milan Investor Summit. She wore white, of course she did, a silk suit, pearled cuffs, a Cartier pin, and a look in her eyes that screamed, "I've already won ValeTech," she declared, voice smooth and deliberate. "Is not just a company, it's a vision. A family-driven legacy rooted in innovation, now poised to lead global AI logistics through strategic partnerships." I nearly laughed. Heather didn't understand the first thing about logistics, much less legacy. She married into a name she could never carry on her own, but she spoke it like she'd earned it, as if proximity had given her birthright in the press. They ate it up, they always do until they don't. That same week, I finalized the last two deals with Oliver's help. Crane Reserve Ventures acquired, controlling interests in two of ValeTech's forgotten divisions, both small, but each holding fragments of legacy, shares granted by my father to historical contributors. People Heather would have never considered threats, now they were mine. I consolidated quietly. No announcements, no flash, just paperwork and patience. When the dust settled, I sat at 43.7% ownership. Not enough for full control, but enough to destroy her illusion. The first visible cracks came when Heather launched Project Lumos, an aggressive international expansion strategy based on data she hadn't vetted. Her new CTO, a man named Victor Miles, had once been fired from a rival firm for falsifying AI capability reports. Heather ignored the red flags. She wanted headlines. She got them, just not the ones she wanted. Lumos failed its first pilot in Singapore. An internal logistics algorithm error caused a 7-day blackout across 80 shipping accounts. Clients threatened lawsuits, journalists demanded statements. Heather deflected, Elliot blamed the previous administration. Miles disappeared from LinkedIn entirely. Meanwhile, I called a contact at the board and said only this: "What's coming isn't personal, it's precision." Elliot came to see me a week later. He looked tired, like someone who finally realized the chessboard that he'd stood on wasn't his. We met in a private lounge near Bryant Park. No press, no lawyers, just two people bound by a last name and a grave neither of us visited anymore. "You're the one behind the shareholder movement," he said. Not a question I didn't answer. "Why now?" I finally looked at him, because she thought I was done. He flinched, but not because of guilt, because of recognition. Heather had climbed over everyone to reach the seat she sat in. But the truth is, Elliot had always known I was the one who understood the company. Even as kids, while he mocked spreadsheets, I was reading merger clauses in Dad's library. He sipped his drink, then leaned back. "Do you want revenge, Jenna, or the company?" "They're not separate," I replied, "but only one of them will survive the meeting." I expected resistance. What I got was silence. Elliot didn't warn Heather. He didn't side with me either, not publicly. But 2 days later, a quiet withdrawal of support came from one of Heather's closest allies, Director Linda Cho, who shifted her proxy vote to an independent discretionary pool. That pool was managed by Crane Reserve. Heather never noticed. 2 weeks before the meeting, Heather launched a PR campaign titled "The Future is Female," featuring herself as the visionary leader of a male-dominated legacy empire. It trended for 48 hours. Then the reports dropped. Anonymous tips, not from me, of course, about the Lumos failure, about Heather's romantic connection with Miles, about budget misallocations for corporate retreats and wardrobe expenses. She cried in her next press release, claimed defamation, threatened lawsuits. She didn't realize the court she needed to worry about wasn't legal, it was corporate. 5 days before the vote, I submitted the final request, Emergency Shareholder Assembly, to reconsider executive leadership of ValeTech. The motion, backed by over 43% of voting shares, could not be ignored. Heather responded with a statement full of buzzwords: smear campaign, sabotage, unjust power play. She still hadn't said my name once, and that was her biggest mistake, because not saying my name doesn't erase me, it only makes my silence louder. The night before the meeting, Oliver called. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" "I was born for this," I said, but I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I wasn't born into power. I wasn't groomed for takeover. I was raised outside the gate, listening through the cracks, learning the rules, not by being taught, but by being denied. And now I was ready to rewrite them. At 900 a.m. sharp, I walked into the shareholder chamber, not as Jenna Vale, daughter of a scandal, forgotten in the will, but as the voice of nearly half the company. I wore black, no jewelry, no makeup, just presence. Heather stood at the podium, nervously scanning the room. Elliot sat 3 seats away, blank-faced. When the vote was called, I stood and spoke for the first time in a public ValeTech room in 6 years. This isn't about bitterness or betrayal. It's about stewardship. I didn't steal anything. I reclaimed it, quietly, legally, strategically. The way legacy should be handled. No applause, no boos, just votes one by one. And when the final tally appeared on screen, 47.8% in favor of leadership restructuring, Heather's face collapsed. She looked at Elliot. He didn't move. She looked at me. I met her eyes, steady as marble. And finally she whispered, You planned this. I didn't answer because queens don't need to speak. They just watch the crown fall. The boardroom smelled like old leather and new fear. It always had the same furniture, oak polished to a mirror, chairs that whispered power when they creaked, water glasses that were never half full or half empty, only untouched. But this time something felt different. This time I wasn't a forgotten daughter standing behind the glass. I was the storm they didn't forecast. Heather arrived 5 minutes late, a small calculated power play meant to rattle the room and reassert control. She wore crimson, brilliant, proud, distracting, the color of martyrs and monarchs and fools. She didn't acknowledge me at first, just swept into her chair, adjusted her blazer, and offered a slow, deliberate smile to the room. I remained silent. I didn't need to speak because the agenda already had my fingerprints on it. Oliver opened the meeting. His voice was even controlled, devoid of emotion. Crane Reserve Ventures, as controlling shareholder representative, has requested this emergency session in accordance with the bylaws of ValeTech Corporation. He slid a folder across the table. Today's objective is singular, a vote of confidence or lack thereof in the current executive leadership. Heather leaned forward. I object. This is procedural manipulation, and Crane Reserve has acted in bad faith. Oliver didn't blink. Your objection is noted. Now let's proceed. She looked at Elliot. He didn't move, looked at me. I met her eyes, calm, unwavering, cold. And that's when her voice cracked, just a hairline fracture, barely audible, but I heard it. The CFO, the CMO, and two outside directors began raising questions. Why were funds diverted to failed side ventures? Why was Project Lumos greenlit without board approval? Why were consulting fees paid to companies linked to Heather's personal contacts? Her answers were polished, practiced slick, but not solid. She tried to mask incompetence as bold innovation. But when you lead with lies, the truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to show up with receipts. Oliver clicked the remote. The lights dimmed. On the screen, a trail of wire transfers, procurement, anomalies, HR complaints, and legal memos never filed. A 6-month audit commissioned by me, executed in silence, backed by signatures. Heather turned pale. Her voice rose. This is a hit job. You planted these stories. You've manipulated perception. I didn't need to. I interrupted my first words of the meeting. My voice was lower than hers, but it cut deeper. You did all the damage. I just documented it. The boardroom went still. Every eye turned toward me now. No longer the girl exiled from the will, no longer the scandal in the margins. Now I was the reckoning. Elliot finally spoke. I vote in favor of restructuring. Heather's head snapped to him. You're my husband. Met her stare empty. No, I was your strategy. One by one, the votes followed Harlan Cho Patel, even Reynolds, the old loyalist. By the time it came to me, the outcome was already decided. But I looked at Heather anyway and said, no more pretending. Then I voted. The motion passed unanimously. Heather was removed as acting CEO, effective immediately. No fanfare, no ceremony, just silence and a gavel. Strike. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She just sat there frozen in her seat like someone who built a castle out of fog and watched it vanish in sunlight. I didn't take her place. I declined the CEO position. I nominated a new executive, someone qualified, someone my father once mentored. Because I didn't want her job, I already had something more powerful: ownership, direction, legacy. After the meeting, Heather tried to speak to me privately. I let her talk. You planned this for years, didn't you? I planned nothing. I said I prepared for everything. She stepped closer, voice trembling with venom, masked as pain. You'll regret this. You'll be alone. I've been alone, I said, and I built an empire with the silence you left me in. I turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. You married your way in, I said without facing her. I bled my way back. The press called it a corporate surprise, a sudden shakeup, a restructuring led by a mysterious investor group. They never printed my name, and I preferred it that way. Heather chased the spotlight until it burned her. I'd rather be the shadow that moved the curtain. 2 weeks later, she vacated the Vale penthouse. I had the locks changed before the elevator even reached the lobby. She left with 6 suitcases, a signed NDA, and a final severance payment calculated down to the cent. Not a dollar more, not a tear less. I returned to the boardroom alone one night, no meeting, no ceremony, just me, the table, and the chair she once claimed as a throne. I didn't sit. Instead, I placed one item at the center of the table, my father's handwritten will, framed, preserved, still unofficial but undeniable. I didn't need it to reclaim what was mine. I just needed to remember who I was before they buried me in silence. No champagne, no standing ovation, no press. Headline called me CEO or Victor or even Vale. And I was fine with that because I wasn't here to be seen. I was here to be unmistakable. After Heather was removed, I didn't move into her office. I had it emptied. Every glossy photo, every designer rug, every glass award with her name etched in temporary glory. I kept one thing, the chair. It sat in the corner, now untouched. Not out of reverence, but as a reminder. A throne built on lies isn't a seat, it's evidence. I appointed Rachel Hahn, my father's former head of operations, as interim CEO, smart, strategic, respected. Heather had once called her outdated funny how the old guard became the future the moment ambition burned the bridge. Rachel didn't just steady the ship, she rebuilt the damn hull. Meanwhile, I worked from a corner office in the ValeTech archive wing. No windows, just paper memories, blueprints. A cathedral of the forgotten, exactly where I belonged. And from that silence, I began to build. Not a takeover, a transformation. The first thing I did, unwind every flashy PR stunt Heather had started. No more celebrity endorsements, no more faux feminist ad campaigns with empty slogans. Instead, we launched the Walter Vail Foundation, a scholarship trust for women in STEM named after the man who never got to see his daughter lead, but trusted she would. And I made sure Heather received the press release. Her name wasn't mentioned, not once. 3 months later, ValeTech posted its first profitable quarter in 2 years. The board called it a recovery. I called it a return to center. Because what Heather never understood was this legacy isn't stolen, it's earned in silence when no one's watching. I ran into Elliot outside the foundation's opening gala. He was alone, no red carpet, no tie, just a man, finally freed from a chess game where he was always someone else's piece. He looked at me, eyes soft. "You could have destroyed her, I did," I said. "But you didn't humiliate her." I smiled thin and sharp. "No, she did that to herself." Elliot stepped forward. "You know, the company's never felt more right. That's because it's finally being led by people who don't want the spotlight, just the work." He nodded slowly. "You're not your father's daughter." I raised an eyebrow. He clarified. "You're better." That night I walked through the empty halls of ValeTech. The lights hummed low. The building breathed like it always had: steel ribs, concrete lungs, glass skin. My heels clicked against the floor like punctuation marks. A rhythm that had once haunted me, now it was mine. In the boardroom, I opened the old vault drawer built into the wall. My father's personal files, handwritten, annotated, smudged with the coffee he never stopped drinking. There, tucked behind a set of economic forecasts from 1997, I found it, a yellowed envelope with my name in his handwriting. "For when you remember who you are," inside a single sheet of paper, my acceptance letter to MIT. Unsent, unspoken, uncelebrated. I cried, but not for grief. I cried because for the first time in years, I felt like I was back in his orbit, not his shadow. And then I did something I never thought I would. I walked into the empty executive suite where Heather used to sit. I placed that old envelope on the desk, not to claim it, to close it. "You tried to rewrite me," I whispered to no one in particular, "but I own the ink now." Months passed. We expanded. We acquired 2 failing AI startups, not for their tech, but for their people. We offered stock options to every floor-level employee, and I made it policy: no one climbs if it means stepping on someone else. Heather's ghost lingered for a while. Some employees flinched when I walked by. Some whispered. But eventually the whispers became respect, and the flinches became nods. 1 year later, I received a letter handwritten from Heather. It said, "I hope you found what you were looking for." I didn't reply, because what I found wasn't something she could understand. She had looked for position, I had rebuilt purpose. Sometimes I still sit alone at night in that cold office light off city humming beneath me, and I remember who I was when they erased me from the will. A name buried under rumors, a daughter kept off paper, a woman taught to stay quiet and grateful. Now I still stay quiet, but I'm no longer grateful for crumbs. I own the table. I never needed to wear the crown because queens don't inherit power, they build kingdoms out of what they were denied, and mine will last long after anyone remembers her name.